Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we're taking a closer look at the Gigabyte Aero 15X from 2018, which was launched alongside Intel's new H-series Coffee Lake processors a couple of weeks ago. We've already covered the new CPUs in depth, and you should definitely check out that video if you haven't already. So today we'll be focusing more on Gigabyte's top-end new laptop. I looked at the original Aero 15 last year and was pretty impressed with most aspects. The Aero 15X for 2018 isn't a massive change from what Gigabyte established with the original model, but we do get some key improvements to hardware and other changes that refine the laptop. And Gigabyte is key to stress that this isn't just a gaming laptop, but a machine designed for productivity, and that shows with features like an X-Rite certified display that I'll get into later. The key piece of new hardware is of course the Intel Core i7-8750H, which brings 6 cores to laptops for the first time and presents a decent upgrade over the older quad-core Core i7-7700HQ, particularly for productivity. The GPU options stay the same, an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060 in the base model and a GTX 1070 Max-Q in the Aero 15X version we're looking at today. The SSD is still 512GB and we get a single 16GB stick of DDR4. One of the other key improvements is the new 15.6-inch 1080p display. This new panel will no doubt be used across a wide range of laptops as it provides a 144Hz refresh rate at this size for the first time. Previously, we were limited to 120Hz on most laptops, so the 24Hz increase is nice for those who like to game at the upper end of frame rates. And you don't get G-Sync with this display, which I thought was a little strange, though it is likely to keep costs down. G-Sync would have improved the smoothness of games, particularly when running below 60 FPS, but provided you're pushing into the 80 plus FPS range, not having adaptive sync isn't a massive issue. In fact, let's talk a bit more about this display because it's one of the more interesting aspects of this laptop. Similar to the last model, the new Aero 15X has super slim bezels around 3 of the sides, which makes the overall size of this laptop smaller and maximizes the screen real estate you can get in the available space. I really love this sort of design. I wish more companies would opt for this similar type of bezel setup. It does have a few drawbacks though, most notably the webcam position below the display gives you a rather unpleasant angle in your video calls. I don't personally use the webcam very often, so it's not a big deal for me, but anyone that is a frequent user should be aware of this trade-off. Gamers get to enjoy the 144Hz refresh rate of this panel, but professionals don't miss out at all either. The Aero 15X, like its predecessor, is X-Rite Pantone certified, meaning the display is factory calibrated to the sRGB standard. This is a key feature for professionals that demand color accurate displays. And while the calibration is provided through a simple software profile, it's better than the complete lack of calibration you get with most laptop displays. As the panel on the 2018 Aero 15X is different to the last gen models, some aspects to display performance have changed. Brightness has increased to around 320 nits up from 280 nits, and that brings a small increase in contrast as well. Viewing angles are still quite good too. Thanks to calibration, average temperature and gamma are almost spot on with relatively even performance across the grayscale range. My Aero 15X unit is less accurate than the original Aero 15 I tested at an average grayscale delta E of 1.62 as opposed to 0.52 with the previous model, but both results are under 2.0, which is still pretty good. It's also likely that just one display profile was created for all Aero 15X laptops, so there will be some natural variance between units. Saturation and color checker results sit at a DE of 2.34 and 2.59 respectively, so around 1.0 higher than with the original Aero 15. Not as rock solid accurate as I'd like to see. As we got with the original model, it was a little bit more accurate, but still a pretty respectable result and certainly a lot better than most laptops. Gaming laptops in particular are often fairly inaccurate, but the Aero 15X is good in this regard and provides that extra refresh rate too, which is always nice to see. Enough about the display though, you're probably sick of hearing about CalMan 5 results by now. Let's talk design and construction, which hasn't changed significantly compared to the original Aero 15. The body is a mix of metal and plastic with several seams around the place that doesn't quite give it the same premium feel as the best metal body laptops. The good news is the body is extremely solid with basically no flex in any area, even if you're mashing the keyboard. Speaking of the keyboard, once again you get an individually RGB LED backlit keyboard with a solid tactile feel feel, and of course a handy numpad. I really like how this keyboard feels to type on, so it's perfect for whacking together a Word document, and naturally it's good for gaming too. The Elan trackpad is okay, though I'd still prefer a higher end trackpad with better, more precise tracking. If you like ports, the Aero 15X has got plenty of them. 3 USB 3.0 Type A ports, a Thunderbolt 3 USB-C port, Ethernet, HDMI 2.0, mini DisplayPort 1.4, a single 3.5mm audio jack, and a fast UHS 2 SD card reader. The Aero 15X's chassis is still very portable at 18.9mm thick and approximately 2 kilograms heavy, not including the necessary power brick, of course. It's not the slimmest or lightest laptop I've seen with these specs, but it's more compact, extremely solid, and far more portable than cheaper, thicker gaming laptops. After all, you're paying for the portability, and Gigabyte certainly has delivered here. Amazingly, these sorts of dimensions have been achieved without skimping on the battery, which remains at a huge 94 watt hours. Want to know what the inside of the Aero 15X looks like? Well, let's take a look. With a T6 screwdriver and a spudger, it's pretty straightforward to remove the bottom panel, exposing, again, a standard layout here. The battery sits at the bottom, while there's a dual fan cooler with 2 heat pipes at the top, sending heat away from the central GPU and CPU to the remarkably tiny heatsinks. In the front right corner, you'll spot a spare M.2 slot compatible with NVMe and SATA drives, while there's also a free DIMM slot. Yes, the Aero 15X comes configured with single channel memory. Considering the extra performance you can get with dual channel memory, which I'll go through in a moment, I'd highly recommend grabbing an extra 16 gig stick of DDR4 2666 and slotting it straight in. Unfortunately, with current memory prices, this could cost you as much as $200 US, and while it's nice Gigabyte leaves a free DIMM slot for you to upgrade to 32 gig, out of the box performance is reduced. So let's talk performance. We've seen how the Core i7-8750H performs before in a dual channel memory configuration in my original review of that CPU, so if you missed it, head back and take a look at all of those charts, particularly if you're thinking of immediately upgrading your Aero 15X to dual channel memory. I'll also chuck the dual channel results in the upcoming benchmarks for quick and easy reference. Here we'll be focusing on the i7-8750H with single channel memory and how that differs from the dual channel results, and later we'll discuss gaming as low memory bandwidth has an impact there as well. Whether memory bandwidth has an effect on performance does depend on the application. In Cinebench, x264 encoding, Handbrake, and Excel, there is a marginal difference between the Aero 15X and what we previously established was the best case performance for the Core i7-8750H. This isn't that surprising. Encoding and rendering tests largely don't require high bandwidth, and neither do Excel calculations. Decompression also seems largely unaffected with just a 1% performance difference in 7-zip, though compression is hit fairly hard, dropping by 20 and 23% respectively in our 7-zip and WinRAR benchmarks. That's a pretty significant difference for just increasing memory bandwidth, so if you have workloads that are compression heavy, you'll benefit the most from adding in that second RAM stick. Adobe apps also like additional memory bandwidth. Premiere encodes are 10% slower, and Photoshop filters like the Iris Blur are 16% slower with just 1 stick of RAM. That's a considerable difference in Premiere in particular, where you might be waiting a while for an encode to complete. MATLAB is well known to suffer with low memory bandwidth, falling behind by 19%. Across the various PC Mark suites, the Aero 15X was slower than our best case i7-8750H results by 2 to 5%, and considering the multi-workload nature of PC Mark, this is a fair result as some tests are not affected by the reduced memory bandwidth and others can be hit a bit harder. On average, across all our productivity workloads, the single channel Aero 15X is 5% slower than our dual channel Core i7-8750H configuration. Essentially, that's the performance you're missing out on by not having that second stick of RAM inside the Aero 15X, which is why most companies tend to opt for dual channel out of the box in these sort of laptops. It's also the data you'll need when tossing up between a range of i7-8750H laptops. If you can find one that's dual channel out of the box, you can expect 6% more performance than the Aero. Of course, it's also worth comparing the new i7-8750H Aero 15X to the older one with the i7-7700HQ inside. The original Aero also uses single channel memory, and in workloads that are not affected by the GPU, as our two Aero 15 review systems did have different GPUs inside, we are seeing significant gains in multi-threaded tests like Cinebench and video encoding. Performance is typically 35 to 55% faster with the new 6-core CPU, and that's a massive performance jump and definitely gives you a reason to upgrade even if you're rocking a system from just one generation ago. If you're moving from an i7-8750HQ laptop with dual channel memory, performance gains are lower on average, though again, a number of typical productivity workloads are unaffected by memory bandwidth. As for gaming, again, if you're interested in a detailed breakdown of how the Aero 15X performs with the i7-8750H, GTX 1070 Max-Q and dual channel memory, check out my original review of the i7-8750H. To save rehashing a bunch of stuff I covered in that review, here I'll just be going through some performance summaries so you can see how single channel memory affects results and how it compares to last gen systems. In general, single channel memory does have a rather significant effect. Performance was down in many games by 10 to 15%, and the biggest losses were up to a 29% drop in 1% lows. A handful of games were unaffected by the drop in memory bandwidth, but in general, you'll find most games are at least somewhat susceptible to lowered performance. As I mentioned earlier, to get the most out of the Aero 15X in gaming, you really want that second stick of DDR4. Compared to a last-gen system with a Core i7-7700HQ, we previously established an average performance gain of around 8 to 10% in games with the new Core i7-8750H, provided you have dual-channel memory. However, the Aero 15X with its single-channel memory struggles to outperform a dual-channel 7700HQ system on average. There are some games that show roughly a 10% performance gain, and there are others that actually show a performance decline, and those are the games that are most heavily affected by memory bandwidth. Interested in storage performance? Well, my review model came with a 512GB Toshiba NVMe PCIe SSD, which is actually a bit slower than the 512GB SSD in the original Aero. That said, it still performs well in sequential workloads, and while it's not as strong as other NVMe drives in random performance, it should suffice for most typical workloads. Plus, there is a spare M.2 slot if you wanted to chuck in more storage, as just 512GB can be a bit slim. Let's wrap up the round of testing with some thermal and noise performance. After all, we saw the cooler earlier, and that thing is pretty tiny. The thermal performance isn't fantastic, but it does fall within normal results we've seen from other gaming laptops, running the CPU at 90 degrees and the GPU at 79 degrees during a Watch Dogs 2 session. However, the cooler does run loud, which seems to go against NVIDIA's Max-Q principle, so not sure what's going on there. While quiet at idle, the cooler roars into action during gaming, pumping out 48.8 dBA of noise from 50 centimeters away. Similar laptops we've reviewed tend to fall more around the 43 dBA range, so no doubt the Aero 15X has to push more air across its tiny heatsink to effectively cool the components inside. Oh, and battery life, that is probably something I should put in this review. The Aero 15X has a monster 94 watt-hour battery, which is larger than most gaming laptops of this size and class. After all, the laptop is positioned for not just gamers, but also those that want to use this laptop for productivity tasks on the go. Looking at the results, we aren't seeing a notable improvement over the original Aero 15, though that isn't a surprise considering the CPU still packs the same TDP. I wouldn't say battery life is fantastic or as good as top-end ultrabooks looking at these results. However, it is still pretty decent for a 15-inch laptop with powerful internals. Naturally, when running intensive applications, the high-performance processor will cut your battery life quite drastically, but in lower power workloads like web browsing, the Aero 15X does put up a good show. For the model we tested, the Aero 15X comes in at $2,299 US and a bit over 3,200 AUD. That is a high price to pay compared to the cheapest gaming laptops with this hardware inside. However, the more portable and compact you go, the higher price you usually have to pay. Most of the Aero 15X's main competitors, such as the MSI GS65 Stealth Thin and the new Asus ROG Zephyrus, also come in around this price for very similar specifications. I still quite like many aspects of the Aero 15X, including its small bezel display, the X-Rite Pantone certification, which is awesome for creative professionals, and the general compact portable nature of the chassis. Not a lot has changed since the original Aero 15 in this regard, but minor improvements in a range of areas is always nice. However, to get the most out of the hardware in this laptop, you really need to upgrade it to dual channel memory. It's disappointing Gigabyte didn't include dual channel memory out of the box. I can understand wanting to make it easy for consumers to add in more RAM with ease, but it does hurt performance in both productivity workloads and gaming. The new 6-core processor in this laptop is the key feature, and it does provide impressive performance gains in some tasks, but it is held back a bit by the single channel memory configuration. I'd still recommend the Aero 15X as it has a lot of strengths and the memory bandwidth issue is pretty easy to rectify, but there is more intense competition this time around, and I'm very curious to see what ASUS and MSI's competing laptops provide when I check them out in the coming weeks. That's it for this review. If you like our laptop content, don't forget to subscribe for more. Consider supporting us on our Patreon at patreon.com/hardwareunboxed, and I'll see you in the next one.